Hello and welcome to Close Up with me, Mohammed Shafiq. This is a program where we talk to people who make the news to get their thinking about common issues that affect all our communities. If you want to get in touch with the show or comment about the show, you can join us on Twitter, official Ummah CH, and if you're on Facebook, there's an official Ummah Channel page on there. My guest today was elected to the House of Commons in 2010 general election. He is an MP for a very diverse constituency here in Rochdale, in Greater Manchester. Simon Danczuk, a very warm welcome to Close Up.
Thank you very much.
Growing up as a kid, was it something that always interested you, politics, or getting involved?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not from a political family.
Yeah.
So many people in politics have got relatives involved in politics and things, but I never had. So my interest in politics came about primarily from reading, from reading books around politics. So by the time I was 60, it's quite sad to say this, but I'd read most of George Orwell's books by the age of 16. And I think that gave me a flavour for politics. And my grandmother, Agnes, while she wasn't involved in party politics, she would often talk about politics with a small p, perhaps, when we visited on a regular basis with my mother. So she always sort of instilled the importance of politics in my life. So they were the sort of key ingredients. I suppose the reason that I took it further in life is because I grew up in a very poor household. My mother brought me and my older brother up in a one-parent family. We lived on benefits, and I think that experience, that life experience, also made me want to pursue a career in politics, so I could help people who don't have a good upbringing, vulnerable people, poorer people, and that's what sort of drives me to fight injustice and to do politics, really. You were in Lancashire, brought up in Lancashire. You've got a really good, strong, broad Lancashire accent there. But what sort of things did you see when you were growing up? What sort of things interest you, hobbies-wise? And yeah, I did. This is a little-known fact, actually. And I don't think I've revealed it before. I did jiu-jitsu for quite some time as a young boy.
I'll behave myself then.
Yeah, absolutely, please, yeah. I'm a bit rusty, it's fair to say. But from being about 7 to 16, I did jiu-jitsu and became a black belt first dan, which is quite an achievement, so that was a key hobby. But just the other usual sort of hobbies that children did, swimming at the local swimming baths, through to, I did a lot of reading. For a child, I came to reading late, actually, so I was late in terms of learning how to read. I'd be about 7 or 8, and I think the first proper book, which is not that well known, Ginger Over the Wall, but this was the proper first book that I ever read, besides the Janet and John books that we had to read. But that because I hadn't learnt to read early on, I think it made me want to read more once I'd learnt how to read. So I've always collected books and read lots of books, always went down to the local library a lot. Even as a young teenager, I'd go to the library and read the Guardian newspaper. I mean, that's not probably something I do now even, but that's what I did, and that was perhaps unusual for a young child, a young teenager, I suppose. Yeah.
So you grew up, you studied, and then you decided that you wanted to be a councillor, and you became a
I left school at 16 without any qualifications, went to work in a factory making gas fires. Did that for a number of years, and then whilst working there I studied at night, went to college, to Burnley College, to Blackburn College, got the qualifications I should have got at school, and then did an access course and went on to be a mature student at Lancaster University. So I'd travel up every day. At the time I was living in Darwin near Blackburn, and I would drive up the motorway, up the M6 every day to Lancaster, the days that I needed to be in there. Then whilst studying I joined the Labour Party and first stood for election. I think when I was 25 I stood to be on Blackburn Council and lost. It's the only election I've lost. I stood again when I was 27 and got elected, and did 8 years on Blackburn with Darwin Council. Yeah, that was very interesting for a young chap as well. Quite interesting.
What sort of things did you, looking back at that time when you were a local councillor, did you achieve?
Yeah, you know what I did enjoy, and I still enjoy it today, is and a reason for standing for Parliament really is the casework, and I say this with all genuineness. As a councillor, I enjoyed trying to solve people's problems. You know, people would bring you, whether it's potholes or dog fouling or planning issues, but I did get a sense of enjoyment from trying to sort people's problems out, as I do now. You know, and I think we work hard, not just me, but as a team in Rochdale here in the constituency office, to try and solve people's problems where we can. So certainly that. I also. The number of local things. I mean, I was also involved in education. Blackburn Council went from being a district council in a two-tier system with Lancashire County Council to becoming a unitary authority, so that it ran all its own services. And I was there during that transition as a councillor, and that was fascinating, because you went from having something like a £22 million budget to having a £220 million budget, taking on education, social services. So I had some responsibilities for the youth service that we inherited from Lancashire, but also around the further education funding, around the youth training programme that they had. So some interesting work, really.
You're not born in Rochdale, you weren't bred in Rochdale, no. So you kind of had to come into Rochdale and kind of get yourself known and prove yourself as somebody who cares about this town. Why did you pick Rochdale? I mean, you could have picked a number of constituencies, but why Rochdale?
Yeah, I've been involved in politics for well over 20 years now. I've always said 20 years, but time's been marching on, and it's probably 20, 25, 26 years. Yeah, exactly. And and I enjoy doing politics, and I enjoy doing what I might call real politics. I couldn't or wouldn't have wanted to represent somewhere that I had no real affinity with, you know, or to. So I couldn't, you know, So you take a keen interest in following politics. You know that some people in politics will just go anywhere to find a parliamentary seat. So I couldn't have gone to the Midlands, no matter how safe a Labour seat it was. It would not have interested me to go down south, to go to the Midlands, or to go up to Scotland. I would have always wanted to fight a seat with which I had some affinity. And what I mean by that is really fight a Lancashire seat. I've lived all my life in, even when I was at university, at Lancaster University, I've lived all my life in Lancashire, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, you know. So I wanted to fight a seat that was very similar to my home place. So born in Burnley, spent a lot of my life living just outside Blackburn. Very similar towns to Rochdale in terms of the diversity, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of being former mill towns. They're all Lancashire towns. So I wanted to represent somewhere that I felt I had a relationship with, and I feel I have a strong relationship with.
Yeah, you had a tough selection, and over the years you've kind of people have grown to love you. We were out in the town today and people were saying, yeah, we like him, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, right. People are generally, well, we hope they were telling the truth to us. Yeah. But it's taken a lot of work for you to do that.
Well, yeah, and the way...
And the fact that you knock doors regularly.
Yeah, and I've been out today knocking doors, yeah, absolutely. I've been on Trafalgar Street today, you know, that's where I've been today. Yeah, and I go out literally every week, and I'll be out on Sunday doing a couple of hours as well. There's 78,000 people to get round, you know, so I reckon it takes about 2 years to get round most people, round most doors, about 40,000 doors. But that's how people can't say I don't come round. You know, I don't catch everybody, obviously, but I try to get around, and that's what I think politics is still missing some of that, you know. There are politicians from a bygone era that did a lot of that. There's a mixture in there in politics, you know. There are some that are proactive and get out there and meet the public, and there are some that don't. Well, I'm one of them that likes to get out and about, you know, and it's given me a better understanding of the locality, isn't it? We sat there with the map behind us, there the streets and the doors that I knock on, and I know every street and I know every door because I've been down there and spoke to people, and I think the public appreciate that.
Now, at the time of the 2010 election, we had that Gillian Duffy moment with the Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and everybody had written your chances off had said, there's no way Simon Danczuk or Labour are going to win Rochdale. And you surprised everybody by winning an 800-vote majority in that election. How did you feel that night when you went to the count?
Yes, we Were we surprised? I'm not sure we were. We'd done a lot of work. I'd been selected as the candidate in 2007, so we'd had a long lead-in time, knocked on literally thousands of doors, a tight-knit team working really hard over a fair time span. So I'm not sure. I don't think we were surprised by the result. We were exhausted. I know that, but we're obviously very pleased. You know, we're delighted. It's a great privilege to be a member of Parliament, isn't it? And to represent a town like Rochdale, which has many issues and challenges, but also many opportunities. It's a town, you know, as a politician, you can get your teeth into and try and do something for the town. So it was a great privilege. I was excited by the fact that I've been elected, but I was relieved to have got past the winning post. I mean, that, you know, we were all very exhausted, but also, you know, buzzing from the situation.
Yeah. And you went to Parliament. What was your first reaction when you got there?
Yeah, it's
kind of, to me,
yeah,
you're a straightforward sort of Lancashire lad, straightforward, the likes of Tony Benn, Dennis Skinner maybe. You speak your mind as it is, and then you go into an institution that is very structured, old-fashioned, hierarchical, and that doesn't fit kind of my opinion of you. I don't know, I could be wrong.
No, well, I would describe myself as an ordinary bloke who believes in the power of politics, who thinks politics can be used for a good purpose, whether it's fighting injustice internationally in different countries, or whether it's trying to fight injustice more locally. So yeah, a very ordinary bloke that happens to do politics, really. And it is a strange place, I mean, there's no doubt about that. And I'd visited it previously, because I've been involved in politics as you've visited it. And so you think, initially, you have a feel for the place. Well, I mean, it's nothing like what you even imagine, even though you've some experience of it. It's very institutionalised. There are ways of doing things. You have to learn these different procedures and rules. Some of them are written down, some of them are just unwritten, but you have to know them, and it takes a lot of getting used to. And I would say it took me 2 years to get used to it, and 2 years to get used to speaking in the chamber, you know. And I'm still cautious about that, I think, which I think is a good thing. I think if you could, too blasé, if you went in there with too much confidence, I think it would be much easier to make mistakes. So I always prepare for questions and for speeches, statements, debates and things. I think that's a wise advice for anybody who's thinking of doing that sort of thing, yeah.
You kind of went there when the Labour Party lost power, sure, after 13 years of a Labour government, and first coalition government, which we can talk about later, but a leadership election, the two frontrunners, the two Miliband brothers, Ed and David, and you could have backed the wrong horse.
Yeah, well, yeah, I didn't back the winning horse. That's the other way of putting it. I backed David, yeah, and yeah, the result was quite surprising. But Ed's a good leader. He's taking us in the right direction. We're still ahead in the opinion polls, so there's all to play for in the run up to the general election. Yeah.
Disappointed it was Ed rather than David?
Well, you back the person that you think will do the best job, but I mean, it's the nature of elections, which is that, and certainly party political elections, you get behind the leader that wins it as soon as, and start campaigning to, you know, for the future, for the next general election.
Now we're a year away from the general election, just over a year to go. What are the kind of reflections that you can make about the government's record and where they've gone right and where they've gone wrong? Yeah,
I'm always you said earlier that, you know, I'm straight talking, and I am, you know, and I think politicians should really give credit. You know, it's very easy it would be easy as an opposition Labour MP to just trot out a long list of attacks on the coalition government, and I'll do that in a minute. But I also think it's right and proper to say where I think they've been getting some things right. And so some of the work around cutting red tape for business, some of the things in the recent budget around helping businesses export, around capital investment, tax-free capital investment for businesses, so they can invest more money in their companies, to, you know, in machinery and things like that. I think we have to welcome those things, you know. But I think, you know, just sticking with with business for a minute, I think they've done much less well on business rates. I've spoken a lot on business rates and how that impacts, particularly on retail in the north of England. It has a devastating impact, the level of business rates that many retailers, independent retailers, are having to pay. So some things I think they've been getting right, but some things they've been getting wrong. Some of the stuff on welfare, the idea of a welfare cap, this is how much which they said they revised the figure in the budget just gone, but this concept of having a welfare cap, I think, in terms of how much we're going to spend, I think is the right decision. So some things they've been getting right, some they've been getting very badly wrong. I mean, the reality is that people are £1,600, the average family is £1,600 worse off under this government. So it's been really tough for some people. There's more people using food banks than ever before. You know, the people at the bottom of the pile are really feeling it. And, you know, if we just stick with welfare for a moment, what they haven't managed to do is devise a system that can differentiate between those that can't work and those that can't work and those that won't work, and that's disappointing. So we have some people who can't work, physically or mentally can't work, and they're being treated in the same way as those that won't work. And I feel quite strongly about this. I take quite an hard line. Anybody who can work should be out there trying to find work, but they're the ones that won't work for whatever reason. They need pushing back into employment. But we shouldn't treat those that can't work in the same way, you know. And the system's not sophisticated enough to be able to deal with that. So the work programme and everything around that, I think the government have got wrong, you know, and I think they could have designed a better system to help people back into work, to get people back into work.
Your opponents in the last election were Liberal Democrats, and how does it feel to see them on the government benches now in government? Potentially could be your future coalition partners after the next election if there's a hung parliament?
Yeah,
how does that make you feel? Because your immediate opposition are the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, well, the first purpose of politics is to serve the public, and that's what you've got to remember, isn't it? You know, and I say this on the doorstep: whatever you're going to vote, if you haven't decided, whatever you're going to vote until at least the next general election, I'm your member of Parliament, and I'm here to serve you, and I'll do the best by that. And that same principle applies nationally, doesn't it? You're talking about the Liberal Democrats. Yeah, we were fighting in in the general election. We all the political parties fight in general elections, but at the end of the day, it was Conservatives and Liberals. Conservatives, the largest party in 2010, formed the government with the Liberals. I guess if Labour's the largest party but doesn't have a majority, then I guess they will either have to run a minority government or they'll have to go into coalition with the Liberals. I mean, it depends what the numbers are.
But you're not die-hardly opposed to the deal between Labour and Liberal Democrats?
No, I don't think you can be. I don't, you know, it's an interesting question.
Some of your colleagues have said
already.
Not, never.
Yeah, no, and I wouldn't do that.
Traitors and things like that.
Yeah, and even though I have quite strong views in terms of the Liberal Democrats, even though I do have, I wouldn't say that, because you have to reach a conclusion about what's best for the country. You know, and it sounds a bit soppy, does that, but I think it's an important point. You do have to see what's best for the country.
And what is best for the country?
Well, I would argue...
What do the Labour Party offer?
Well, we're going into a general election, and we'll devise more policies between now and then, so we've still 12 months to go. But we would do things tremendously different from what the coalition government have done. We have got the idea of a work programme. It's not called that. A jobs guarantee for people who've been unemployed, whether they're young people or older people. A jobs guarantee. You will get. We will line up a job for you if you've been unemployed for a certain amount of time. I think that has to be welcomed. It's about encouraging people back into work. You want fewer people unemployed because the benefits bill is too high. We will build we'll get up to building 200,000 houses a year. I think that's a real positive. The government, Labour have said that they will reinstitute the 50% tax rate for people. So there's a lot to be done under a Labour government.
I just wanted to ask you, because you were criticised by some of your colleagues because the straightforwardness, speaking your mind, criticism of the leader and the one nation ideas. Are you kind of building a bit of a reputation as a bit of a troublemaker in the backbenches?
I don't think so. I don't think I've ever criticised the leader, actually. What I've said is that I wrote a piece for PR Week, Public Relations Week magazine, beginning of January, where I was talking not just about Labour's slogans, but also about all political parties' slogans. One of the worst, actually, I think, is from the Liberal Democrats, which is Alarm Clock Britain. I think the most dreadful slogan you could come up with. But I were also making the point about Conservatives and about Labour slogans, saying that we should be a bit more careful about how we use them. And I was saying that the One Nation speech which Ed Miliband made at conference was excellent, but should it be a slogan that's attached to One Nation banking, One Nation social security? I'm not sure it should. So I was making a broader point about, but no, I've never been critical of the leader. I mean, I think he's doing a tremendous job in leading the Labour Party in what's difficult times. You know, it's unusual for us to be, you know, Labour's in a pretty good position, very united, ahead in the opinion polls, and potentially on course to be the biggest party to win the general election. And that's saying something that would be very unusual for a party to have been out of power, to be in power, out of power and back
in opposition.
Yeah, yeah. So we're not in a bad place.
And what does the future hold for you? I mean, obviously your immediate concern is getting re-selected first and then getting re-elected. Yeah. For those of our views that know you have to be selected by your party again. Right, yeah. And then are you standing again? Yeah,
I would expect to stand again in Rochdale and carry on the work that I've initiated. I think we're making some progress in Rochdale. So what's the future for me? It's very much about in the short to medium term, very much about helping get Rochdale back on track. And that's not a slight on previous MPs. It's difficult. Doing politics is difficult. Getting some stability in the town, getting the town punching its weight, I think is important. Getting the economy back on track locally, sorting out the social issues in the town. It takes a lot of work. And so I'm dedicated to doing that as best as I can over the next few years, you know.
Okay, I think it's time for a break, and when we come back we'll carry on the conversation with Simon Danczuk, who's the Labour MP for Rochdale, and talk more about the campaigns he's been involved in these past 4 years. Join us on the other side of this.
Really, yeah, and it's quite a challenge. I enjoy it and we work hard at it. My wife leads the business, but it is interesting. It's in the centre of Rochdale. We've just got our first business rates bill. It's far too high, but I don't think there's anything we can do about that. Always scores better on the economy when they're in power than the opposition party. So I think there's some inevitability about that. But you know, the idea that people are feeling like everything is rosy in the garden in terms of the economy, I just don't think that's the case. The well-off will be feeling better.
Welcome back to Close-Up with me, Mohammed Shafiq. Welcome back to Close-Up with me, Mohammed Shafiq. If you want to comment on the programme today or share your thoughts about what Simon Danczuk MP has been saying, join us on the discussion on Twitter, official Ummah CH, and if you're on Facebook, there's the official Ummah Channel page on there. Simon, I mean, you've been involved, you've been an MP since 2010, but one of the first campaigns I saw you come across was when you set up this new group within the Labour Party Friends of Palestine and the Middle East. And we know we've got a very strong pro-Israel lobby, if you like, within the Labour Party for a number of years. But you set this up, you know, found a member, and why is the point I'm trying to get is people accuse you of jumping in a bandwagon of Palestine because you represent a town where there's many Muslims, or do you actually deep down, you know, believe that the struggle of the Palestinians is something worthwhile?
Yeah, I do believe it's worthwhile, but I've always been clear as to why I got involved in it, and it's because as a candidate in Rochdale, people said to me in the Muslim community in Rochdale said to me, you know, I don't dress this up, I don't pretend otherwise, that I've been some great Palestinian campaigner for many years, but in 2008, I would guess, people in the Muslim community in Rochdale said, you know, one of the biggest issues that's important to us is the plight of the Palestinians. And so I took it upon myself to learn more about it. And I went out there. I spent about £1,000. I went out with a local councillor at the time. You'll remember him. He's not around now, but Ibra Khan. We both went out there on an organised visit, both spending a bit of money and seeing what the situation was like. And I'm pleased that, you know, people in the Muslim community had encouraged me to examine the issue, you know. And I'm not one of those politicians, I have to say, that thinks they know everything about every subject. And I readily say that I'm happy to be educated about things. And I was educated about the Palestinian situation and what an injustice that is. I cannot understand, I just do not understand how people can justify the way that the Palestinian people are treated. I just do not get that at all. So it's a terrible injustice. You're right, I was a co-founding member of Labour Friends of Palestine in the Middle East, and I've worked on it for quite some time. I've stepped back a little bit in more recent months. We've got a new chairman now, with the chairman for quite some time, Graham Morris, the MP for Easington, really good guy, and he's doing a great job in leading the organisation. But it's all about, you're right to say, I mean, the Israeli lobby, it had been strong in Labour, it had been strong
in all the parties, yeah.
Strong in all the parties, yeah. And this has been a counterbalance. And people tell me, because I've only been in Parliament since 2010, but there was certainly something missing until we set up Labour Friends of Palestine. So it gets quite an audience in the Labour Party. So I think there's been an appetite for it, and it's not, you know, it's not world changing, is it? But it does affect the situation. It provides a counter view within this particular political party, and I think in its own way that is achieving something for the Palestinian cause. So I'm quite pleased and proud of my involvement in that.
Well, what future do you see of the peace talks happening at the moment and the John Kerry?
Yeah, I don't know. I get quite despondent about it. You know, I think there has to be some radical change. I just think there has to be some radical thinking around what the solution is. You know, I don't know. I don't know. We live in hope, don't we?
Live in hope. And one of the other things, obviously, there's a strong Kashmiri community here in Rochdale. I'm Kashmiri myself. Again, it's something which you've done, and you've gone to Kashmir, you've seen it, and you're still campaigning on this.
Yeah, that's right.
I think you're in the all parliamentary group as well, aren't you?
I am. Yeah. The treasurer of the all-party parliamentary group on Kashmir, and I had an adjournment debate on Kashmir.
This was the census. I was going to come to the census.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that's you know, I campaign. I wouldn't want your audience to think I just campaign on issues relating to the Asian Muslim community. You know, I campaign a whole range of issues. I think you know about the high streets, business rates, all sorts of different topics. But you're right about Kashmir, and I mean, I've been out there. I mean, in terms of the issue around self-determination, I think is the right one. I think it's a complex picture, I have to say. Different parts of Kashmir have different views on whether they should be independent, or whether they should be part of Pakistan, or whether they should be part of India. So, depending on which sub-region people in which sub-region you ask, because opinion polling has been done around this, you probably get a different view. But I think there has to be some sort of conclusion to it, and it doesn't get wrongly, but it doesn't get the sort of attention, the international attention that other areas of the world get, and I think that's unfortunate. But much more closer to home, this issue about the Kashmiri identity and about the census, I think it's a really interesting one. I had an adjournment debate on this recently. This idea that people of Kashmiri origin should, if they so wish, when they complete the census every 10 years, should have a category to be able to tick to say they are of Kashmiri origin, and that doesn't currently exist. They can say they're Pakistani, they can write in other and put in Kashmiri, but...
what was the reaction from the government?
Yeah, well, one issue is how they take forward the census in future years, because there's been talk about revising the way that the census is done. The other point is that we need to get the National Statistics Office to buy into the idea of having another category, and we have to get ministers to buy into the idea of having another category, and I don't think they're completely convinced by that. We've had one adjournment debate, and they're not going to just conclude that all of a sudden. And you have to be aware that there will be lobbying from the Pakistani lobby and from the Indian lobby, and so the Kashmiri issue gets squeezed by these two large lobbies in British politics, which is unfortunate, because we shouldn't have what we think is best. It's very important that people have that identity, but it's also important because we want to know what the situation is for people of Kashmiri origin, so that we can direct fund, you know, if they're facing particular problems in society, then we can target resources at them, can't we? And we can address the problems that they might be facing. But we can't do that if we don't know who they are. But we shouldn't let international issues determine or dictate what are national or national issues.
And last year in August, with potential of military strikes in Syria, you voted against military action. Yeah. What you would say to people who say that you were complicit in Assad's crimes because you stopped the British government from taking action to protect a humanitarian intervention? Yeah,
I think that's an interesting point, and I don't think it's a very difficult situation in Syria, isn't it? There's no doubt about that. But I think we reached the right conclusion, actually, and that really shows the power of Parliament. And it must have been a difficult decision for Ed Miliband, because the general consensus in politics would have been telling him in previous years to go along and support the government. And I think he reached the right conclusion, actually, in saying, no, we need to step back and think first before. And I do sense that we were being rushed into a decision which is never the right way to go in terms of military action. We learnt that from Iraq, didn't we? You know, you have to think long and hard about this. But I still think that it was the right decision not to take immediate action in that way, you know. And you know, the people in the British community as well would say, you know, we should take a step back from getting involved in military action in that way, whether it's in Syria or in any other part of the world for that matter.
Now, just touch,
if we may, just on the controversial things that you've done campaigns. One of them has been on child sexual exploitation and grooming. You've kind of led that campaign, you've spoken to victims. What is it that drives you on that particular campaign?
Well, what I've said, I mean, Rochdale became notorious for on-street grooming, though you know as well as I do, because you've done much campaigning on this as well, to which I give you credit. But it became synonymous with Rochdale, though we know it's been happening in many other parts of the country, you know, and many that are coming to the fore most recently, every other week for that matter. But the reason that I spoke about it as much as I did is because I wanted to give a voice to the victims. I met some of the victims of these terrible crimes, and met some of the parents of some of the victims, and you know, I also wanted to fill that void that often gets filled by the extreme right, whether that's the British National Party or the National Front or the English Defence League. And really, I think it's for mainstream politicians, whether that be Labour, Liberal, Tory, whatever, to talk about these issues directly, instead of allowing the far right to dominate the discussion. So I was keen to, lead some of the discussion around it, you know, raising it in Parliament, but making speeches around it, doing media around it, so that people felt that mainstream politicians were taking on board and learning lessons from what had gone so terribly wrong for these victims.
Some of the people in the Asian community were saying that you were tarnishing all the Asian community by making it into a race issue. What would you say to them?
Well, I think some of those people, you know politics as well as I do, you know, and particularly in Rochdale, politics can be quite aggressive and excited. Some of those people that were saying that had a political motivation for saying it, and were trying to, you know, create political problems for me, and weren't really bothered in the issue or in addressing or in tackling the problem of on-street grooming. So I think it's unfortunate that some people use what is a very sensitive, important issue as a political football to try and score political points. But what I've always said is that the race issue in terms of on-street grooming is just one piece of a very complex jigsaw, but it is one of the pieces, and we can't deny that. But there are many other pieces as well, you know, people living in poverty, people working in the nighttime economy, the poor policing around the issue and how they ignored the victims, the local authorities' ignorance with regard to this sort of issue. But the biggest issue lies with the perpetrators. They're the people that commit these crimes. They have the biggest responsibility to this. It's a very complex issue, but I don't regret saying anything that I've said, and I'm happy to be educated about, you know, how things can change and how things can work. But I think there is more for the community to do, whether that's the white community or whether it's the Asian community. There's more for us to do, because that's where the solutions come from at the end of the day. I've blamed the agencies for their failures around grooming.
Because there's a thing about the institutional that are there to protect these victims have let the systems let these girls down.
Yeah, and I think that's true, but at the same time we can't just rely on agencies and systems. It's down to communities to discourage this sort of behaviour, about educating young people to be more aware of the possibility of being groomed. You know, there's a lot communities themselves can do as well, and that's for all of us to act upon, you know, and you spoke out on this admirably, I believe, because you've helped set the tone to say we need to think differently about how we deal with this type of thing.
What about the proposals, I think, from the local council leader here, Rochdale, about closing down taxi offices and takeaways, and how effective would a proposal like that be?
Well, I think I'm all in favour of giving the police more powers if they are going to be useful and if they're going to reduce crime. But I'm not one for creating laws and creating more legislation if it's not going to be used. I don't know, you know...
You think the legislation's already there?
Well, I'm just going to make the point that I think the police have a whole raft of powers that they can already use to deal with this sort of problem. So I'm not sure if creating lots more laws is going to make any difference, to be quite honest. You know, just reaching for legislation every time when something goes wrong is not the solution. And we know from the grooming case, the failure of Rochdale Council wasn't anything to do with poor legislation. It was to do with the mindset of social workers believing that these girls, children, were making life choices to sleep with adults. Well, they can't make those life choices because they're children. So it's not to do with legislation. The police are ignoring the victims when they came forward. Nothing to do with legislation. It's to do with the culture within Greater Manchester Police at the time. So politicians, whether it be local politicians like the council leader, who are calling for new legislation, or whether it's, you know, I think they need to think twice about doing that.
Now, the high street, you champion the high street so much so that you've actually opened a deli shop.
I know, that's right. And you know, at the high street,
are you kind of practicing what you preach?
I suppose I am, really, yeah. And it's quite a challenge. I enjoy it, and we work hard at it. My wife leads the business, but it is interesting. It's in the centre of Rochdale. We've just got our first business rates bill. It's far too high, but I don't think there's anything we can do about that. I don't think we can even appeal it, but it's a challenge. But yeah, the high street's important, isn't it? Because it's the heart of any community. And I think there's a role, and again, it's not about legislation, it's about councils, local authorities, because they're the primary democratic body locally. They have to provide leadership on it, but bring in other agencies, bring in private sector. They have to make things happen and make it work. And some councils, some areas are really good at that, and some find it more difficult. So I'm trying as best as I can in Rochdale to try and stimulate the council to do more. And we've got some things going in the right direction. We've got new signage going up. We've got, you know, the street scene is being considered much more in Rochdale Town Centre than it used to be in terms of planting of trees and things like that. But there's some major regeneration projects that the council's been looking at. Will they come off or won't they? I think only time will tell. But new transport interchange, new council offices for the council workers. So there's some redevelopment going forward, but whether it's enough, it's not enough. It's not a complete solution yet.
And people say, when we walk down the streets in Rochdale Town Centre, people say, oh, the town's dead, there's no shops here. Yeah. Or you go to Bury or you go to Oldham and it's heaving. Yeah. What lessons can Rochdale Council learn from our neighbours?
Yeah, I think they should learn as much from Hebden Bridge and Todmorden, actually, you know, as well as the Oldhams and the Burys. And the reason I say that is that we don't want an identikit town centre. And what I mean by that is a town centre that just has I'm happy to have these stores, Next, Boots, but these are the you know, the usual shops that one gets, the multiples as they're commonly known. So we do want some of those, but I think Rochdale could make itself a little more unique by having more independent retailers, as they have in Hebden Bridge and in Todmorden. So they could put money into grants and support, and perhaps to get more of the Asian businesses to come into the town centre itself as well, because they are really good at business and they're very good at independent retail. So get a real mix and vibrancy in the town centre instead of just hoping for attracting, as they have done in Bury. I mean, they've got the market, which is great there. We should get our market out of the shopping centre into the streets of Rochdale itself, give it a real vibrancy. And all that doesn't cost a lot of money, actually, but we seem hell-bent on building a new shopping centre. We've already got two, and the council solution is to build a third shopping centre. I'm not sure that's the solution.
Rochdale's got a bit of a reputation for the wrong reasons. What are you doing to kind of give people a real image of what Rochdale means?
Yeah, I think Rochdale, there's a lot of positives around Rochdale, and we try to talk about those as often as possible. You know, we've got a fantastic countryside all around surrounding Rochdale, which people take advantage of. People visit Hollingworth Lake from all over Greater Manchester. You know, the heritage that we've got from the town hall, which is a top-class architectural building, through to the Co-op pioneers, through to some of the architecture in the town centre itself, with the post office and some of the banks there. So it's got real potential, and we need to talk that up more. I think we need to do a better job in terms of promoting the town, and it needs to. You know what I think it needs to do? What Rochdale is it's a Lancashire market town, and instead of trying to be anything else or something else, which I think the council gets carried away with sometimes, we should get back to what it really is, which is a Lancashire market town, and celebrate that, celebrate its heritage and its history, get it back having a decent market in the town centre, get more independent retailers in there. So we need you can't just talk it up, you can't just use words, you have to prove it by making things happen, and I think we need to start doing more of that. What we have managed to achieve over the last 3 or 4 years is changing personnel in some instances within Rochdale. The former chief executive's gone, I think that's a good thing. The former managing director of Link for Life has gone, I think that's a good thing. So some of the key players that I think have held the town back have now moved on, and I think we've been clearing the decks to be able to move on and create some of the more positives that we can talk about more proudly.
We've gone through some of the toughest economic times in the history of this country.
Yeah.
People say it was the Labour government that left that economic mess for the coalition government to resolve.
It's a world recession, weren't it? You know, that's the reality of it. I actually think that Gordon Brown, over time in history, will be remembered for having managed the economy relatively well. You know, it might seem to some of you viewers hard to believe, but I think some
£156,000 billion deficit.
Well, but we were getting the country back on track. We've always run a deficit. I mean, for many years. But and you've sometimes got to invest to be able to get yourself out of where you know, the problems that you're in. Yeah, a world recession. That was by 2010, it had occurred in 2008. By 2010, we were going back for growth and going back in the right direction. It could be argued that this coalition government has actually held us. We're back into growth now, but have stalled the economy for a couple of years, and and took longer to get us back on track than they should have done. Because they slammed the brakes on far too hard, you know, and really stopped the economy, created real problems, and spent a lot of money on benefits, keeping people on welfare, and have only more recently started creating the jobs that have been needed to get people off welfare. So it depends how you look at this.
But you do accept that there were some mistakes that were made by the Labour government?
Well, all parties in power make mistakes, there's no doubt about that. And, you know,
because that's your weak point, isn't it, as a political party going into the election? The economy, David Cameron and George Osborne are scoring higher on the economy than...
well, I think but I think they tend to do anyway. I think the incumbent party always scores better on the economy when they're in power than the opposition party. So I think there's some inevitability about that. But you know, the idea that people are feeling like everything is rosy in the garden in terms of the economy, I just don't think that's the case. The well-off will be feeling better, but the vast majority of people out there watching this programme will think it's been tough, it's been too tough. This government is helping the best off in society, but it's not helping Joe Public, and I think that's why people are turning to Labour. That's why we're still ahead in the opinion polls, because they know that this government isn't serving the interests of the majority of people, it's serving the interests of a small minority of people, and that's the richest people in the country.
You're married to Karen, you've got 2 boys. What do you do to relax? Do MPs ever switch off?
Yeah, well, some do, but perhaps I'm not one of them. I mean, we do the deli, which I enjoy. Yeah. I've been down there for my lunch today, and I spend time with the kids. I like playing with the kids. We do a bit of gardening and stuff. We just moved from a terraced house into an house that has a bit of a garden, so I've never done gardening before. You know, I've never really had a garden before, so I like playing in the garden with the children, and you know, doing a bit of gardening and things. That's probably one of the things. But you know, I'm not big on sport. I never pretend to be a big football fanatic or anything, but I do enjoy watching Rochdale now and again.
I was just going to say, yeah. Rochdale top of the League Two.
No, that is a good news story.
That's a good news story,
isn't it? It really is, yeah. And the Hornets, Rochdale Rugby, they're doing really well as well. So from a sporting perspective, and we did well in the Olympics from a Rochdale perspective as well. So sport, actually, we're pretty good at. The other thing Rochdale's really good at is, and you know, talking about how I switch off, you know, in terms of culture, we've had bands of all different shapes and sizes, musical talent, poetry, creative arts are pretty strong in Rochdale. Touchstones and the gallery there and the exhibitions. So going around some of that I enjoy doing as well. So there's no shortage of things to do and to celebrate in Rochdale. Yeah.
Final question. To those viewers who think, what's the point of politics and politicians, what's your answer?
Oh, you know, politics is about achieving things, isn't it? Trying to get improvements in people's lives. That's how I see politics. So, you know, I do have people that say to me, you know, I don't do politics, I don't bother voting. It's a big mistake. They should, you know, somebody's going to be in power, so try and affect it. You're going to end up with somebody representing you, and it might be somebody who does a good job or somebody who doesn't do a good job, but try and reach a judgment in terms of who you think will do the best job for you and your wider community, and go out there and vote, because as sure as night follows day, you will end up with a politician of some shape or size, and you don't want one that you really don't like, so make sure you use your vote.
Simon Danczuk, thank you so much for coming to Close-Up. That's our guest, Simon Danczuk, the Labour MP for Rochdale. We're very grateful for him for spending the time with us here on Ummah Channel. If you want to comment on what Simon's been saying, we're on Twitter, official Ummah CH. But until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Goodbye.